Most financial advisors do not have a shortage of marketing ideas. They have too many burners going at once, whether it's social media, seminars, referrals, emails, podcasts, digital advertising, client events. The result, a lot of activity, but not always a lot of momentum, and sometimes not even enough activity. So in this episode of the Financial Advisor Marketing Playbook, we'll use the 4 burners theory to explore a simple question: which part of your marketing deserves the most heat right now, and what may need to be turned down so it can finally work the way it should? Let's dive in.
This is the Financial Advisor Marketing Playbook, a show for financial advisors who want to explore the topic of client acquisition and business growth. Your host is Mark Mersman, Chief Marketing Officer at USA Financial. He is an investment advisor representative of securities offered through USA Financial Securities, member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor.
Welcome back to the Playbook. Today, I want to talk about a concept that I was somewhat recently introduced to, and it just clicked. It's called the 4 burner theory, and if you're not familiar with this, I'll kind of give an overview, and I want to touch on what it is from a personal standpoint, and then we're going to kind of parlay this into a bit of a marketing and a practice management conversation, but the concept really is, so imagine your life is a stove with 4 burners, and those burners are family, your friends, your health, and your work. And the theory says that because we have limited time and energy, we cannot keep every burner running at full heat. So obviously there's a limited amount of gas supply, and at some point, whether it's consciously or, unconsciously, we decide which burners are going to get the most fuel. And, some of the big examples that they look at are those, people's names that you would, you'd certainly recognize. You think about the Elon Musks of the world, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, and they have put so much, the burners that are on, they put so much time and energy into their work that, they're turning other burners off as a result. It's why, oftentimes when you see people that are so invested in their career, their family or their friends or their health will suffer. Sometimes all 3 if they're really invested that way. But, it's why you see oftentimes the Elon Musks of the world. You speak with ex-wives of Jeff Bezos or their kids, and they'll kind of acknowledge that they weren't really a part of their lives because they put so much of their energy and attention into their career that the other burner suffered. And it's, this isn't some sort of scientific law. It's really more of a mental model designed to make us confront the trade-offs that we're faced with in life. So the question becomes, what does this even have to do with financial advisor marketing? And I'll contend that, if we take this concept and apply it to your business or apply it to perhaps just your marketing in general, the advisor's stove, if we're referring to that from a marketing standpoint, might be really overcrowded. You might be trying to post things on social media, send a newsletter, host a seminar, start a podcast, ask for referrals, run digital ads, sponsor community events. And none of these ideas are necessarily bad. The problem is, each one requires a certain amount of planning, execution, follow-up, measurement, and repetition. And my contention is, not that there's anything wrong with having multiple things going on from a marketing standpoint, but you need to really identify where it is that you're going to turn up the heat. And I'll tell you, most advisors are not struggling because they chose the wrong marketing tactic. They're struggling because they might not leave one tactic on the burner long enough for it to work, or they're not truly evaluating what are the activities that work best for me? Because I will flat out tell you, depending on the nature of the advisor, how they want to market themselves, there are certain activities that just do not make sense for them to do. And so, when we think about the different marketing burners, if we're going to try to narrow it down to 4, I don't think that it's smart for us to think about this as a tactic being a burner, let's just say seminar marketing, because the truth is, tactics are going to change a little bit. I think we want to look at this at 4 different functions that a healthy advisor marketing system must eventually perform, depending on where your practice is at. And the first one is positioning. Who do you serve? What problem do you solve? And why should somebody choose you? And so this is going to include everything from truly having an ideal client defined. You have a specialization, you have a brand story and a value proposition to that office or to that audience. And, the truth is, without this burner and without getting a little bit of fuel here, the rest of your marketing, it might create attention, but it might not be the type of attention you want, or might not carry the right amount of relevance. So the first burner, as we think about, your overall marketing picture and marketing efforts, is positioning. So where is our positioning in the marketplace? Do we have our ideal client defined? Do we have our value proposition defined? And this is one of those things that you might have to put a little more gas to this burner in the early going, or at a certain point in your career to say, hey, hold on, I got to hit timeout. I want to redefine who it is that I serve and what problems I help people to solve. So that's one. The second is visibility. How do the right people repeatedly encounter you? And this is an area that is about awareness. It's not necessarily always just direct response, but this is going to be the one that if you are in need of activity, this is obviously the one that you're going to be spending the most amount of fuel towards, is to create the right kind of visibility. But if we don't have the first burner dialed in, the second burner doesn't matter. So this might include social media. This could include seminars. This could include webinars. This could include digital advertising, videos, podcast, SEO, AEO, all that stuff. But you need to make sure that you understand visibility isn't just about getting your name out there. That's one part of it, but it's becoming familiar to the right audience. And I suspect many of you are in a spot where this is an area you need more attention, need more help. And, as you evaluate different marketing activities, then it's about making sure that marketing activity is going to identify or help you be identified with the audience that you want to serve. The third burner is conversion and follow-up. Once somebody shows interest, you're engaging with them, what happens next? And this is going to be everything from calls to action. This is going to be appointment setting. This is going to be your follow-up process while you're courting them, the discovery meeting experience. What does that all look like? And, once you get, the second burner dialed in and you've got good flow, it's about what's the conversion and the follow-up. The fourth burner here is one that I don't think enough advisors pay enough attention to, and that's the client experience and advocacy, because this is the part that is no doubt going to derive referrals. It's going to create your generational relationships. And, this is going to include everything from the moment they become a client and say, yes, I'm a client. What does that experience look like? This is onboarding. This is the communication cadence. This is ongoing client education. How do you stay positioned as an authority to your targeted audience? This is what ultimately leads to introductions, referrals, generational relationships. And this is done oftentimes through different appreciation events or some way to continue to keep your clients engaged. Here's the thing that I think we need to recognize. We can never have all four of these on high. This is true in our personal lives when you think about the work, the family, the friends, the health. Unfortunately, there's that trade-off. And so you may want to think about both in a from a personal perspective, as well as within your marketing. Maybe you have one burner that's always going to be on high, two burners on medium, and then one burner there's kind of a pilot light. And so perhaps you want to think about your burners. If you break down in a year, one quarter, you're going to put a little more emphasis in one area, and then have two other areas on medium, and another area on the back burner, and work with your team on this. And this might be kind of an evolution that you go through in your practice. The next quarter, maybe you're going to crank up after you spent one quarter a little more heavily on positioning. The next quarter is going to be, let's amp up the visibility, and that's what's going to get all of my attention, my team's attention, and kind of taking a little bit of a marketing season approach. If you've done seminar marketing, you understand there are certain times of the year where we have to be dialed in, and that is quote unquote seminar season. I think that makes a ton of sense to think about your overall marketing approach within the four burners, to break it into different marketing seasons to help you and your team define what is it that we're going to focus on this season. What's going to be full burner, what's going to be mid burner, and then what are we just going to keep on simmer. The other thing that you get a little bit of an advantage of if you have a team is you can outsource certain things, right? If we want to crank up visibility, or maybe we want to dial it down, we want to outsource some of that activity. So whether it's the video editing, whether it's the digital ads, whether it's the website management, whether it's the event planning, you can outsource that. Whether you outsource it within your team and you assign somebody that your job is to be full fuel to the burner that is visibility, and I need you to have your entire focus there. Or maybe you're going to outsource it completely to a third party. The one thing to remember, though, when it comes to outsourcing, you can outsource the execution of these things, but I don't want you to risk outsourcing your voice or your perspective or the relationships, because at the end of the day, as the advisor in the office, you have to be the one leading the charge. And so it's okay to delegate. Delegation will keep a burner running. You cannot completely outsource your voice. You can't outsource your perspective or your relationships. So keep that in mind. I would encourage you, if some of this makes sense or not, do a little bit of an audit within your own practice. If you look at the four burners, positioning, visibility, the conversion piece, and then the client experience, ask yourself the question about positioning. Can someone quickly understand who we help and why we are different? If they can't understand that, maybe you got to put a little bit of more focus on that burner for a bit. The visibility side, are the right people encountering us consistently? I would argue that for the majority of advisors, this is the biggest challenge, and the one that probably is going to get the most heat. For some, if you've got a mature practice, that might not be an issue. You're getting some referrals, you're getting some activity, and maybe you want to look at a conversion. If the conversion's a question mark, do prospects have a clear and compelling next step? And am I converting them fluidly through my process? And then lastly, the client experience. Are clients naturally becoming advocates? I think that's a big question that sometimes you might not always be truthful with yourself, because if you might think you deliver an incredible experience, but if you're not getting consistently introduced by your existing clients, there's something that you can probably consider making a change with. So I'd ask you, within your practice, which burner is currently the hottest? Is that intentional, or is it because it consumes the most of your time? And is that really the burner that should be dialed up right now? Which burner is dangerously close to going out? These are all questions that candidly, when I was first introduced to this, it hit me like a ton of bricks on the personal side, because, when you think about that balancing act that we all play within our lives, depending on where you're at, what stage of life you're in, it's sometimes hard to get enough fuel, right? And so I want you to be thinking about that. The truth is, when you go through this, most planning exercises, they only ask what people will start to do. And so, like, you go through it, if you've been through planning programs or coaching programs, they're going to kind of ask you, what are you going to start doing? The 4 burners theory is really forcing you to think about, what do you have to stop? What do you have to pause? What do you need to delegate or reduce? Because there's only so much fuel to go around. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about life. It's an interesting way to kind of approach your business. I'm sure there's other analogies I could have used, like from a business and practice management standpoint that would tie in really nicely with the 4 burner theory. But, I guess I'll wrap up with this, understanding that a successful marketing plan is not one in which every possible tactic is running at full blast. It's one where you have intentionally decided where to apply your limited time, limited energy, attention, and money. And, you're keeping the essential burners alive, but determine which one deserves the most heat in this season of your business. Hope this is helpful. If this is the type of content you enjoy, please encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. Subscribe to us on YouTube. And good luck and take care out there.
This information is for licensed financial professionals only and is not intended for use in soliciting sales from the public. The views expressed represent the opinions of the presenter or their featured guest, not necessarily those of USA Financial or its affiliated subsidiaries. Industry references are generic and are not intended to represent actions or beliefs of any individual or entity. Content is only presented to illustrate general principles, beliefs, or ideas and should not be construed as legal or regulatory advice. Trademark and copyright protected. USA Financial and Affiliates.